From being called a literal toolbox by the UFC president, to asking a deaf fighter if he's okay after a brutal beating. Here's why Steve Mazzagatti is the worst UFC referee in history. It might look like I'm exaggerating. Well, tell that to UFC heavyweight John Fitch. Good referees are among the many necessary tools to make a UFC bout successful. Guess Steve missed the memo and decided to become a toolbox in the eyes of the boss himself, Dana White. It all went down at World Series of Fighting 3, or correction, John Fitch went down bad at the hands of Josh Berkman. As the two fighters touched gloves, Berkman wasted no time in going ham on Fitch. We were seconds into the fight, and out came the guillotine collapsing down on Fitch's neck. As the Californian welterweight tried to grasp every ounce of breath he could muster up, hanging on for dear life, everyone waited for the tap to put him out of his misery. And there came into the frame the man of the hour, Steve Mazzagatti, ready to stop the fight. Steve? Steve? Bro? What are you doing? By this point, even the ring girl knows he's unconscious. It took Berkman to roll his opponent over to confirm his kill. Only then did Mazzagatti feel he needed to attend to Fitch, who was fast asleep. Celebrations were on, but boy oh boy was the party only getting started. Dana White took to the press during a media event for UFC 161, where he went on a 9-minute rant dubbed Mazzagatti dangerous for the sport. He publicly appealed to the Nevada State Athletic Commission to take him out before somebody got seriously hurt. Apparently, according to the executive director of the commission, Keith Kaiser, didn't think anything was wrong with the call, and that he was just as surprised as other officials to see an unconscious Fitch. But what about Mustafa Al-Turk versus Czech Congo? Okay, let's give Mazzagatti the benefit of the doubt for the Fitch blunder. But when you're officiating a bout that features one of the hardest hitters in the UFC, there really is no margin for error. As Mustafa Al-Turk made the ballsy move to pursue the French sensation, he had no choice but to go for the low blow to get the upper hand. And when Congo came back with a brutal knee to his you-know-what, luckily Mazzagatti looked alive and said that he was tolerating none of that in the fight. It was reassuring to see Steve actually take the bout seriously. Oh, wait. I spoke too soon. As Czech Congo floored Al-Turk, this time striking above the waistline for a change, he bombarded him with vicious lefts and rights, which ensued one of the most ridiculous late stoppages ever. Guess Mazzagatti was a little too engrossed in the fight, spectating the thrashing as Al-Turk tried to hang on for dear life. You might as well give the man some popcorn. From spiking elbows to thumping hammer fists, the referee finally decided to do some actual officiating, only at the sight of blood. And of course, Ariel Helwani was going to interview his biggest fan about his thoughts. One line summed up Dana White's frustration. Steve Mazzagatti is the worst referee in the history of fighting. Woo! But it couldn't be more ridiculous than when Yves Edwards took on Josh Thompson at UFC 49. At the MGM Grand Arena, the two fighters put on textbook grappling galore. Now, this is one of the few times I'd love to be the ref, just spectating the two fighters putting on a show. Yves caught Josh from behind, who tried to offset the clinch, and bam! With a thundering kick to the head, Thompson was compromised. As the Thug-Jitsu master commenced the classic ground and pound to seal the bout, there came the man, the myth, the legend, Mazzagatti, like a person walking in a park. He seemed unconvinced that Thompson was out of it, most likely from the moment Edwards' shin bounced off his skull. A few moments later, Mazzagatti eventually stopped the fight, but the potential brain damage was still recorded, adding to his collection of questionable decisions. But let's head over to see if he's any different with the ladies. Using Sarah D'Alelio versus Ronda Rousey as a case study. After setting the MMA game ablaze, Ronda Rousey was poised to keep the momentum going. Earlier in the fight, Ronda went for her signature armbar straight away, looking to make a statement with a submission. All were confused when Mazzagatti broke the fighters up, seconds into the submission. Wait, something's not right. Where was the tap? Let's look at it from a different angle. As audiences witnessed the slow-mo replays, there wasn't a tap in sight. Mazzagatti's explanation? Apparently D'Alelio had verbally called it quits, saying tap, tap. The bantamweight monster strongly denied any of these claims. It's ironic how the only time Mazzagatti intervened and stopped a fight was when it really wasn't needed. But you know it's bad when a fighter personally requests that a referee not officiate their match. The beast incarnate, Brock Lesnar, is notorious for beating up referees in the UFC. But you just know how badly he'd want to send Mazzagatti to Suplex City. It all went down at UFC 81 in his iconic fight with Frank Mir. During the bout, Brock was clearly dominating Mir, landing blow after blow, making his way to the W, only to be stopped by a surprisingly vigilant Mazzagatti after an illegal back of the head shot. Without warning, Mazzagatti deducted an entire point from Lesnar, which completely switched the momentum of the fight. You bet there wouldn't even have been a speculation for an illegal blow had Mazzagatti saved the defenseless Frank Mir from Lesnar's barrage of fists. Long story short, Mir caught Lesnar in an ankle lock, which had Brock submit. The heavyweight apparently handed in a request for Mazzagatti to stay away from his classic against Randy Couture. But let's talk about the fight that put Mazzagatti on the map for all the wrong reasons. Anthony "Rumble" Johnson versus Kevin Burns has the reputation of being one of the most controversial fights in UFC history. It was all dirty from the get-go, with Burns looking to eye-poke his way to victory. Rumble was in serious discomfort, having his vision compromised, and yet a perfectly able referee, having a clear view of Burns' antics, made it obvious how bad the situation was. There were no penalties given in the match, just some lukewarm warnings. Rumble tried his level best to stick through the match, but in round 3, it was just a little too much. Burns caught him with a thumping uppercut following the eye poke, while Rumble was seen screaming to the ground. You'd think this is where Mazzagatti would finally call in the doctors, right? He did call off the fight, only to raise Burns' hand in victory. Everyone knew what had happened to Anthony Johnson, but this story does have a happy ending. Keith Kaiser intervened and called for an instant replay, which rewarded the DQ to Johnson. But justice tasted sweeter when Mazzagatti came out on Inside MMA, finally admitting his mistake. Though no justification is apt enough for his antics in the iconic Jon Jones vs. Matt Hamill fight. Yep, I'm talking about the one time Jon Jones lost in the UFC due to illegal elbows. But no, we're not calling those elbows a bad call. What gets overlooked is how often Jon was begging him to call the match off during it. The UFC's GOAT was a little too dominant in the bout, neutralizing Hamill's takedowns like they were nothing. In the end, you could tell Jon decided to finally let his inner assassin loose, not caring about Hamill's well-being. Adding insult to injury, Matt had suffered a dislocated shoulder in the bout, leaving him in no position to defend himself. While the DQ was truly shocking, jaws dropped when Mazzagatti had the audacity to go over to Matt, blinded by pools of blood in his eye sockets. I asked him if he wanted to continue the fight, and oh, it gets better. Fun fact, Matt Hamill is deaf. So from asking a deaf fighter if he's okay after a brutal beating, to being called a literal toolbox by the UFC president, that is exactly why Steve Mazzagatti is the worst UFC referee in history.